This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 14th of September 2024. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the author and political analyst Charles Hecker. Plus, we speak to Kate Kruimink, who is the winner of Weatherglass Book's inaugural Novella Prize. And singer China Moses joins us ahead of her performance at the London Jazz Festival launch party. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, here's the news. China's military has condemned the transit of two German Navy ships through the Taiwan Strait today, saying it increased security risks and sent the wrong signal, adding that Chinese forces monitored and warned the vessels. China urged Germany to avoid any interference that would jeopardise the healthy and stable development of bilateral relations, it added. Donald Trump has pledged to conduct mass deportations of Haitian immigrants from the Ohio city of Springfield, even though the majority of them are in the United States legally. During the presidential debate on Tuesday, Trump made false claims that Haitian arrivals in the town were eating household pets. And since then, two schools were evacuated and one was closed after anonymous bomb threats were made against the community. And Boeing and union negotiators will return to the bargaining table early next week, US federal mediators said on Friday, as the two sides try to end a strike threatening the aeroplane makers' turnaround. More than 30,000 members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers who produce Boeing's top-selling 737 MAX and other jets in the Seattle and Portland areas voted on their first full contract in 16 years, with 94.6% rejecting Boeing's offer and 96% favouring a strike. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin and I'm joined in the studio by the political analyst and author of the upcoming book Zero Sum, Charles Hecker.
Good morning, Georgina.
Good morning to you. Your book, we always start with a little bit about your book because it's getting ever closer and closer. When's it coming out?
It's coming out on November 28th. Thank you very, very much for asking. And we are now in the final chasing after errant semicolons period of editing.
Well, the thing is that the book is about business and Russia, and that's where I want to start today's programme, because Russia has just accused 6 British diplomats of spying. And of course, you know more than most people about Russia. Why would they have done this?
So we've encountered, the past 2 or 3 days, we've encountered a series of frustrating escalations and developments in the war in Ukraine and the relationship between Russia and the West and the relationship between the West and Ukraine. And so the news starts with the expulsion of 6 British diplomats from the embassy in Moscow, the British embassy. Russia has accused them all of being undisclosed spies on behalf of the British government, and they've all been sent packing. We should anticipate a response from the British government with the expulsion of Russian diplomats from the embassy here in London, I'm sure, in the near to immediate future. And this is yet another step in the degradation of relations between Britain and the UK. Britain, of course, being one of the leading supporters of Ukraine in the war with Russia. It will now be much more difficult for these two governments to communicate, especially at a critical time like this. Although I should point out that recently we've seen sort of the red phone or the hotline between Washington and Moscow become a little bit more active, and folks on both ends of that line are picking up when the phone rings, which is good. But there's something extremely frustrating about the incrementalism of all of this. And we find ourselves, Keir Starmer was just in Washington, D.C., meeting with President Biden to discuss Ukraine and to discuss Russia. And we find ourselves at another one of these should we, shouldn't we inflection points in seeking from the United States, which is acting as the proxy of the head of NATO at the moment, for permission to shoot missiles deep into Russian territory. And the meetings in D.C. were largely inconclusive, although I don't think we're ever going to see anybody issue a sort of bright line statement saying, yes, the moment has arrived, we're now going to shoot into Russia. But the war is now more than 2 years in. And if you think about it in the very broadest sense, with very little progress on either side. And there's something about this ongoing public 2 steps forward, 1 step back approach that is enormously frustrating and raises questions about whether the war should have gone on this long had we been more decisive earlier on.
And Putin, of course, threatening all sorts of dire consequences if British-made long-range missiles are used within Russian territory. He's not been specific about what he'd do, but the threats are there. And this, of course, was one of the things that Starmer and Biden were discussing in Washington. But he seems to have come home. Starmer seems to have come home from D.C. with no concrete signal from Biden.
That's right. President Biden, during his meeting with Keir Starmer, said that he doesn't think very often about Vladimir Putin, which I find a bit excessively dismissive, considering the commitments that the United States government has made to Ukraine and the stance against Russia. There will come a time, I suspect, when we will see heavy long-range missiles used against Russia. But what we're doing now, and you talk about Putin's lack of clarity in delineating exactly what his response will be, that vagueness is intentional. But what we're doing now in this extremely public debate about retaliation with long-range missiles is we're almost forcing President Putin into some sort of escalation and some sort of reaction, because we're saying the moment's coming, the moment's coming, the moment's coming, wait for it, we're going to hit you, and cornering him in a way that we have sometimes tried to avoid in the past. Yeah, absolutely. Just before we move on from Russia, I have to ask you a question. I say Moscow, you say Moscow. How do they say it in Moscow if they're Russian? Well, if you're Russian in Moscow, you say Moskva. I think Moscow is the American way of saying it. Moscow is the English way of saying it. And if you're a real Muscovite, you're going to really emphasize that O sound. You're going to say Moskva with that sort of heavy Moscow accent. Okay. I'm going to go with Moscow simply because it gives me a really bad segue into Italians being in a froth over the future of their milky cappuccinos. I'm so sorry. Bravissima, they might say in Italian. We're looking at a bold-face headline in the Financial Times today that says soaring coffee prices have Italians afraid and panicking. And having seen that headline, I've been trying all morning to conjure in my mind what it's really like to be in the presence of an Italian who is genuinely afraid and panicking. But here is what Italy is panicking about. And that is that, and Georgina, cry us a river, please, when we talk about the cost of coffee in Italy. But basically, Italians currently drink some of the least expensive coffee in Europe. Wait for it. They pay €1.20 for an espresso or €1.50 for a cappuccino. Now, I came into the studio this morning with a tray, a very small tray of very small cappuccinos that cost me more than £11. It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. But it is looking like that shot of caffeine that Italy relies on to get its mornings going is going to go up to £2. Now, this is, as the FT says, charmingly cheap for Londoners or New Yorkers, but this is a major shock to the system in Italy, where we're told that Italians look at coffee like the rest of us perhaps look like bread. Italians have responded creatively to the challenge. There is apparently in Liguria an espresso bar owner who said, look, I will charge you 70 euro cents, but you have to bring your own cup, your own spoon, and your own sugar. This is all down to global coffee prices soaring because of poor weather in some of the world's main growing regions. But it's also supply chain disruptions, and that's mostly around the Red Sea. That's, of course, Houthis in Yemen and so on. That's right. We have two ongoing sort of boogeymen to blame for this, and that is climate change and the pressure that is putting on crops. And that is that Arabica beans and Robusta beans are both growing in cost. It's not just in Italy, it is globally, and it's also at the grocery store for beans in bags, and that's just because the crops are not as reliable as they used to be. And for those beans that are harvested, then when you put them on ships and try to get them around the world, exactly as you've said, when they try to pass through these global pinch points that are now the center of regional conflicts, it's slower, it's more expensive, and the only way to recover those costs is to put them up at the level of the barista.
So Italians all up in arms about that. Now, other things that get people up in arms, one of them, of course, is flight delays. We get very, very cross about this, don't we?
Yes, for everybody who has had a holiday flight canceled and spent a night in an inhospitable airport hotel, spare a thought for two astronauts who are on the International Space Station, hundreds of miles above Earth, orbiting at thousands of miles an hour, and they are stranded. Now, I use that word ill-advisedly, perhaps, because these two astronauts, Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore, will not say that they are stranded. But let's put it this way. They were brought up to the ISS on a Boeing spacecraft in June for what was supposed to be an 8-day trip. And now here we are 3 months into their drama, and they're still there. And they had a press conference yesterday to say that everything is fine and that 90% of their training is exactly for malfunctions and eventualities like this. So they're settling in. They're settling in for the long haul, and it will still be a number of months before they come back.
Yeah, extraordinary. And they seem to be in very good spirits and very good-humoured about the whole thing.
That's right. They talked very briefly about things that they miss, but are reasonably philosophical about it. Sonny Williams said that she misses her family. She misses her dogs. Georgina, something perhaps that you can relate to as a dog owner. Wilmore said that he's got a daughter who's in her final year of school and missing the memories that sort of landmark year creates. But they say that they're working out every day, keeping their muscles in shape. And one plus to all of this is that if you're a little bit advanced in years and you've got some squeaky joints, that all goes away when you're in space. There's no pressure on your exactly. There's no pressure on your joints. There's no the irritants of walking or running or lifting or jumping or climbing stairs. All gone in space with the absence of gravity. So there's no such thing as sore knees, sore ankles, sore hips, and so they're able to exercise to their heart's content.
What about the election, though?
Yes, well, so here's what's interesting is that Sonny Williams, I think, mentioned that she is getting an absentee ballot on the space station, and this is thanks to the fact that, of course, they have the internet. I wonder if the Wi-Fi is any good on the International Space Station. But they themselves take advantage. They are essentially a satellite revolving around Earth, but they take advantage of all the communication satellites that are there. And you can log on to your sort of supervisor of elections, as most American voters do when you're voting absentee. And Sonny Williams says that she looks forward to receiving her absentee ballot on her laptop, and she will vote electronically in absentia, as millions of Americans do when they're not near their polling stations on election day. And all of that is going perfectly routinely.
Excellent stuff. Now, listen, here is the story I have been looking forward to covering all week. Established in 1991, the Ig Nobel Prizes are a good-natured parody of the Nobel Prizes. They honour achievements that first make people laugh and then make them think. They feature miniature operas, scientific demos, lectures where experts must explain their work twice, once in 24 seconds and the second in just 7 words. Acceptance speeches are limited to 60 seconds. And as the motto implies, the research being honoured might seem ridiculous at first glance, but that doesn't mean it's devoid of scientific merit. Charles, I think the first one that you really don't want to talk about is that animals can breathe through their rear ends.
Yes. Well, we'll start on that one very, very quickly. And Georgina, though, you have to admit that the Ig Nobel Prizes had me scratching my head initially, thinking, is this a spoof? Is this The Onion? Is this like the Darwin Awards? But these are indeed genuine scientific endeavors that may or may not have produced the breakthroughs that their sponsors anticipated. But they've gone into some fairly tricky disciplines, including a group of Japanese biologists who thought that mammals can breathe through their hindquarters. This is just one of a number of things that will have you scratching your head. And this is my attempt to rig a transition to the next Ig Nobel Prize, which looked at hair growth patterns above and below the equator. Now, you'll know that there's a topic of urban myth that when using the loo, the water goes down in one direction, north of the equator, and in another direction, south of the equator. And so there is a piece of work that has won an Ig Nobel Prize questioning whether the swirl on the back of a full head of hair goes in one direction above the equator and in another direction south of the equator. The swirl on the back of my head has long since disappeared, but I don't think that there's any necessary truth to this, much as there is no truth to the Ig Nobel Peace Prize, honoring the work of American psychologist B.F. Skinner, who produced a paper in 1960, I suppose this is a belated award, but better late than never, that said if you put homing pigeons in the nose cones of ballistic missiles, they hit their targets more accurately. Homing pigeons, of course, well known for their ability to deliver notes and small parcels attached to their legs. This really didn't work very well, and especially for the pigeons sitting in the nose cone of a ballistic missile upon impact. So there's a lot to be seen here in the list of Ig Nobel Prizes.
The Physics Prize for demonstrating and explaining the swimming abilities of a dead trout, which I thought was great. They found that, in fact, dead trout do swim.
They remain exactly as aquadynamic, as hydrodynamic as a living trout. The swimming gets a little bit more difficult, though, when you are, of course, dead.
In botany, real plants imitate the shape of neighbouring artificial plastic plants. I mean, wow.
This reminds me of there has been research that says that partners or spouses begin to resemble each other as they grow older in each other's company. There has also been Ig Nobel research that pets and their owners begin to resemble each other with the passage of time in close proximity. I anticipate seeing those on the upcoming lists of Ig Nobel Prizes.
If you're trying to tell me I look like a Springer Spaniel, Charles, I'm done with that.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
Monocle's free to subscribe daily email newsletters, the Monocle Minute and Weekend Edition, deliver headlines and a swathe of recommendations from our editors, correspondents and bureau. You can also browse a menu of radio highlights and Monocle films. Our weekend newsletters deliver great columns from Andrew Tuck on Saturdays and Tyler Brulé on Sundays, cultural highs, media diets and far-off newspapers, recipes to cook at home. It's a fun take on weekend living. Head to monocle.com/minute to be part of the conversation.
You're listening to Monocle on Saturday with me, Georgina Godwin. My guest, Charles Hecker, is still with me. We were talking about the Ig Nobel Prize competition, and I want to talk about another competition because this year the independent book publisher Weatherglass Books launched its inaugural Novella Prize. It was judged by the author Ali Smith, and one of the winners is Kate Kruimink, and she joins both of us here in the studio now. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Now, here's the thing. Breakfast at Tiffany's, Old Man and the Sea, Heart of Darkness, Animal Farm. We all know what these have in common, right?
They're all novellas.
They're all novellas. But yet, I mean, those are some of the most famous books in the world. And we don't really think of them as novellas, do we? Could you explain what a novella is?
It's interesting, isn't it, how it's not just a short novel. It's a thing of its own. So the definition is that it's a piece of literature between 40,000 down to 20,000 words. So it is a short novel, but I think substantially it's quite different because a novel, being unconstrained in length, can go on in any direction. But a novella has to allude to a greater world in a way that doesn't necessarily engage with it, but gives you this quite confined story, but with the suggestion that it is part of something greater. Mm-hmm.
So why, for you, did you decide to write in that form?
Well, it's a very specific and non-literary form. So the definition is that it's a piece of literature between 40,000 down to 20,000 words. So it is a short novel, but I think substantially it's quite different because a novel, being unconstrained in length, can go on in any direction. But a novella has to allude to a greater world in a way that doesn't necessarily engage with it, but gives you this quite confined story, but with the suggestion that it is part of something greater.
So why, for you, did you decide to write in that form?
reason. So I'm a novelist
Yes.
back in Tasmania. I've written 2 novels, and I was chatting about novellas with a writing friend of mine. I'd never written one before, and she found this prize over in the UK. And said perhaps we should enter together. And it was only 2 months till the deadline. I'm quite busy. I didn't have a novella. But I had a bit of a look, and the judge was Ali Smith, the writer. And Ali Smith is someone who's been very important to me as a writer myself. I'm still really early career. Such a hopeful thing to say, isn't it? It sort of assumes that there will be more career, but let's call it early career. And I read her book, How to Be Both, which is quite formally, quite structurally interesting, as well as being a great story, back when I was first sort of really beginning to think that it was something I could try. And it just really excited me because it just felt really new. It felt really unique. And I felt so heartened that there was space for something that was written in a way to serve the story, not what people might expect. And so I rustled up a novella for Ali Smith. But I made one of the main villains Scottish, so then I had to lose nights of sleep over that because, of course, she's Scottish.
Yes. That's hilarious. All right, tell us about your book.
Well, luckily, I had been doing a bit of research, reading the journals of the surgeons on women's convict ships, which are absolutely fascinating documents. There's so much about them. The convict women were mostly young, and they tended to take their children with them. And I have small children myself and a bit of convict ancestry, so I couldn't help but put myself in that position. You know, it made it feel so immediate. What choices would I make? And I also had the thought that, unlike the male convicts, the women had more comfort with them, with their children, but also so much more vulnerability and so much more potential for heartbreak because, you know, infant mortality was very high, for example. So I wrote my novella set in that world. It's very contained. It's on this little convict ship packed tightly with suffering people. There are no geographical markers, and the story centres on a very young, very traumatised character. And the way she's holding herself together is by refusing to think about her past or her future, which is kind of perfect for a novella because it just leaves her almost contextless in this confined environment, just trying to figure it out.
Now, Charles has got a book coming out in November, and he's a debut author, and I think he had some questions for you.
Yeah, thank you. Georgina at the top of the broadcast noted that I've got a first book coming out, and I also, that's a bit of a gamble saying a first book because it implies that there'd be more. But I thought I would ask you if you could tell us a little bit about your first experience in writing and how you got your first book published or where the idea came from and just what that first adventure was like.
Well, congratulations. That's really exciting.
Thank you. And congratulations to you, of course, on the prize.
Thank you so much. So writing's a funny thing. I sort of feel like, I mean, you might agree that when you're a writer, you sort of always know. You always know your whole life that there is something about you that is writerly. It's kind of an observational quality, perhaps. And so I'd always known this about myself, and I'd published a few short things, and then I had a baby, and suddenly time was incredibly precious, and I was incredibly tired, and everything was heightened, and I thought, oh my God, I have to write a book. So there's a prize in Australia it's a manuscript by a young writer, and the deadline was in 8 months, so I wrote a book for that and submitted it moments before midnight on the deadline, and let it go. But it won. It was a strange way to be published for the first time, though, because I had to sign an NDA. So it meant that I was working in secrecy, which, looking back, I think is probably a bit of a disservice to a young writer first starting out. You can't chat to your community. You can't check in and see if things are normal. You know, you can't go back and forth about the cover with other people. But overall, it was a wonderful experience. And that book is actually a sequel to this novella. That was the other thing that helped me write the novella quickly, was that the world was already formed in my head.
Excellent. Just a word about this prize and Weatherglass books, sort of generally. Why, I don't know how much you know about sort of why it exists, why this prize exists.
I've read the publishers' spiels on it, but I'm so tired. I've blanked. But I do remember the phrase, the novella as a form for our times.
Yeah. And I mean, I think they're cognizant of the fact that our attention spans are getting shorter, and TV and films and so on have trained us to expect narratives that evolve quickly. But they also say there's something a little more profound going on. It's the increasingly chaotic world is paradoxically too complex for a novel to take on, and a novella with its tight focus, with its needing to come to an end, with its singular atmosphere, just as you were saying, Kate, is the ideal form for glimpsing something essential about the world and ourselves. And I think it's so great that they have started this prize, because there was such a gap in the market for that. And I think people are crying out for novellas, even if they don't know it.
Yeah.
And also the fact that it's been championed by a writer of the status of Ali Smith is extraordinary.
Oh, it's such a gift, and she is such a gift. She's going to be judging it in future years as well. And I so agree with you about the necessity of kind of stripping away the noise and getting at something essential. I'm a co-winner, and the other novella that won is called Earth by Deborah Tompkins and is going to be published early next year. And her novella is so different from mine. It's so broad in scope. It takes place across planets and sort of 40 years span. And yet in the same way, it focuses very tightly in on something essential and quiet.
Kate, thank you so much for coming in. Kate Kruimink is the winner of the Weatherglass Novella Prize, and her novella is Astraea. Thank you so much to you. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome to the land of wine, cuisine, fashion, and the art of joie de vivre. France, the Monocle Handbook, is the third installment in our series of hardback guides for the best things to do, see and discover in all corners of l'Hexagone. Over 220 plus pages, Monocle's latest book showcases the crème de la crème of the country, from the Atlantic to the Alps and the windswept Normandy to the sun-kissed Riviera. Plus, top tables in Paris, Nantes not-to-miss hotels, and where to splash out in Marseille, and plenty more to try from piste to plage. If you're looking to stay longer or put down roots, the book also spotlights the neighbourhoods to know and introduce you to the plucky entrepreneurs who have already made the move. France, the Monocle Handbook is out now. Buy your copy today at monocle.com/books.
Now, this November, the London Jazz Festival will bring over 100,000 audience members together at over 300 live shows at venues across the city, from basement jazz bars to concert halls. Joining us now on the line is China Moses, who'll be performing at the launch party on Monday. China, welcome to the show. I wonder if you could describe your music for anyone who may not have heard you before.
Well, I'd like to say that I'm a singer-songwriter of soul and jazz, and my music blends together all of the subgenres of Black American music. And hello to you, Georgina, to everybody who's listening.
What a great voice you have. I love it, China.
Thank you.
You were born in LA. You were raised in Paris. I wonder how your upbringing influenced your musical style.
Well, when I arrived to France, it was pretty early in my life. So I was about 7 years old. And France at that time had a very, very broad musical soundscape. We had on the radio anything from Public Enemy to Madonna to groups like Rita Mitsuko or Les Négresses Vertes. And it was also the beginning of the French rap scene. So I think my musical ear was influenced and nurtured by all of those different sounds. Of course, I grew up also in a very artistic family. I'm a fourth generation musician. My father was a theater director who worked with Mary Baraka and Archie Shepp, and created a touring company in the segregated South called the Free Southern Theater with two of his other friends. And my mother is a renowned jazz singer, Judy Bridgewater, and I was just always surrounded by art and always encouraged to be who I am as an artist. So I think my music was always a little bit odd, a little bit off-kilter, maybe always leaning left alternative. Even when I was doing pop R&B, I started off singing rap choruses for big rap groups. I was a pop R&B star in France. I did 13 years of TV. I worked for MTV and Canal Plus and Arte and for all these wonderful, cool stations. And I guess all of that kind of influenced what I've become today, which is just a storyteller and singer-songwriter of soul and jazz.
So you've got an album coming out called It's Complicated, and it features a cross-genre group of musicians. I wonder if you could tell us more about what we can expect on that.
Well, the album will be available for pre-order on Nina Simone's birthday in February of next year. I'll be releasing some music, hopefully, before the end of the year. I'm fully indie artist, so music has to be done between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. But let's just say I worked with a wonderful producer, Troy Miller, who has worked with people like Jamie Cullum and Gregory Porter and Laura and Bula. And the wonderful singer-songwriter, Ollie Rockberger. I was living in London for a while, and that's when I got to meet these incredible musicians, and they gave me their full support behind my very late night singing memos. And we went to New York because Troy felt it was very important that I go home to record, and I recorded with Daru Jones, who is the drummer of Jack White, Michael King, who's Theo Croker, Letitia Benjamin, Marvin Sewell, like all of these incredible artists who are like my musical family. And I just started writing songs that were very, very brutally honest. There's a song about divorce, which is inspired by the letter that I wrote to my ex-husband. There is a song about finding yourself after 40 when you're divorced and you have no kids, and dealing with what the society sends back to you as an image of what a woman should be. I have a song about dating. I have a song about the horrible mass shootings that happen here in France, the terrorist attacks and the mass shootings that happen back at home in the United States. I kind of deal with life like most artists in in my art, but I try to always bring the duality of the joy and the pain, and the sunshine and the rain, to quote the amazing Frankie Beverly who just passed. But that's why it's complicated, you know. But there's always a solution. There's always an ending to the story, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. But I think living in that honesty is very important as a person.
Yeah. Talking about the ending to the story, sadly, we're just about out of time, but just give us a quick answer to what the launch party on Monday is going to, what we can expect from that. You're performing at the London Jazz Festival launch party.
Yeah, I'm coming through with my band. I'm going to be performing solely songs from this unreleased album, and it's going to be a party because I'm there. And when I'm in most places, it generally becomes a party. But they're also going to be launching, telling more about the programming, and you'll get the full programming day. And it's going to be a wonderful celebration of this incredible festival and diverse festival. I played the festival 3 times last year. I played it at King's Place, and it was sold out, and it was wonderful. So they invited me back because I bring the party.
I'm sure you do. Wherever China is, that's where the party is. China Moses, thank you very much indeed. And China will be performing at the London Jazz Festival launch party this Monday, the 16th of September. And that's all for this edition of Monocle on Saturday. Thanks to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. Thanks to my guests, Charles Hecker, Kate Kruimink and China Moses. And Monocle on Saturday returns next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Now, playing us out is It's Okay, I'm Not Alone by China Moses.
Don't you dare stop until you reach your